continuing with Lecture Day 8, let's move on into what will eventually be the Persian campaign for Alexander the Great. But first, a little bit of background on some of Alexander's generals and companions. And when I say companions, these aren't just his friends, okay? Companion as a friend, but these are his companions as in his bodyguard. The companion cavalry were the men that rode on horses alongside Alexander the Great in all of his major battles. They were usually nobility. Some of them were even relatives of him. And so those are the companions. And so let's first talk about Philip's old generals. And so Philip's old generals are kind of these three men: Parmenion, Antipater, and Antigonus. Antigonus also goes by Antigonus Monophthalmus, or Antigonus the First, depending on the year, okay? Antigonus the First, he will eventually become king of somewhere, spoiler, but he becomes known as Monophthalmus because he eventually loses one of his eyes to injury or disease and infection. It is not exactly clear, but he basically wore an eye patch most of his life, or at least most of his later years as being a general, and became very well known as Antigonus the One-Eyed, okay, because of it. And he will go on to be a great general after Alexander the Great's death, and he will become extremely important during that portion of the Greek lectures, but we will get to that next time. So, first, we have next we have the companions. We have Cletus the Black. Cletus the Black, of course, is called the Black due to his dark hair, okay? He is actually Greek, and he is Macedonian, of course, like the others, but he was born with very dark black hair, which was, as if you recall from the last video, we said that the Macedonians were mostly blonde or fair-haired. And so Alexander is said to have had blonde hair or very light brown hair. Pictures of him of the time always show him with a very lightish brown hair, as well as almost all the other Macedonians at the time. But Cletus, dark hair, and he was a massive man. He was at least 6 feet tall, huge guy, huge warrior, one of Alexander's closest bodyguards and friends during some of this period. And of course, again, his nickname is due to his hair color. Hephaestion was Alexander's best friend and also lover. He was a man, and back then in the Greek world, as well as the ancient world later on in Rome, as well as other previous ancient civilizations, homosexuality was not really frowned upon. It was not really kind of the stigma or anything, like it is in some of the modern world today in some places and with some people. But back then, it was, if you liked someone, man or woman, regardless of you being a man or woman, it was fine, and people didn't look down on it at all. And so that was interesting back then compared to today, which is kind of now has more of a stigma with it with some people. Ptolemy is one of the other people that we will talk about a lot in the same period that after Alexander's death, along with Antigonus. The two of them become extremely important after Alexander dies. He is actually Alexander the Great's cousin, and so is a relative, and because of that, he kind of holds a little bit of sway more than some of the others. And then finally Philotas, who is the eldest son of Parmenion, so one of Philip's old generals, and has kind of grown up, just like Hephaestion, Ptolemy, and Cletus. All of them grew up with Alexander the Great when he was a young boy. They all used to have fun together when they were children, and now they are all older, and now they're all basically soldiers together in Alexander's army. Okay? So, where is this Persian campaign going to begin, or when is it going to begin? It's going to begin basically when Alexander the Great is 21 to 22 years old in the year 334 BCE. And the first thing he does before any big conquest or any big expedition, the first thing a Greek does is goes to one of the oracles in Greece, and in this case he goes to the most famous one, the oracle at Delphi. But he does it during the winter, And during the winter, the oracle is closed. The oracle is actually a priestess, specifically, with this temple that is built on the side of a very holy mountain at Delphi. And in the cave of the mountain, the oracle would go and pray inside the sacred cave. And during the winter, it was said that she wouldn't do it because the mountain or the whatever she divined through the gods would not really come and talk to her during that time because it was too cold, or possibly it was more of her feelings that it was too cold, based on the translations and also interpretations of historians since. But it's kind of interesting because he goes anyway. He goes during the winter. He says it doesn't matter that she's closed during that period. It is his purpose and his right as the king of Macedon and the basically ruler of all of Greece, the hegemon of Greece, that he can do this. And so he basically demands her to make this divination and this fortune telling of him and what his war is going to be like against Persia. And basically she says in the translation to him that yes, whatever you do is going to be successful, that it's going to work out for you. And so in this campaign, and that he will be the ruler of the world. And so he takes that as, okay, let's go. Soon after, he has massed his army, and they cross here at the Hellespont, which if we go back to here, the Hellespont is this little sliver of water right between here going up to the Black Sea. Okay, we've had a couple battles during the Peloponnesian War there, and that is exactly where he will be crossing. He basically makes a bridge of boats, and also has just other ships going back and forth constantly across this like half-mile stretch of water. And the first thing he does when he gets to the tip of the shore, right next to the shore, he gets to the front of the boat and he takes a spear and he throws it at the ground on this side of the coast and of this side of the Hellespont on the Persian side. And he says that with that throw, he has basically claimed the land by calling it Spear Won Land, that he has already won the battles. Like, it is now just going to be a formality, and yes, he will have to fight their actual battles, but he will win. That he will take Persia and Asia, by his spear, by his fighting. And along with him, and along with his army of 40,000 troops, which are mostly Macedonian phalanx soldiers of the Pesheteroi, he also does bring his companion cavalry as well as other cavalry. He also brings Greek hoplites, actually real hoplites that you remember from the phalanx style fighting. And he also brings peltasts. He also brings his favorite horse, Bucephalus. Bucephalus is his favorite horse, and the horse that he will ride into every single battle. This beautiful white horse that was a gift from his father. Along with those troops, he brings with him his half-brother, his older brother. Remember I said that he was the second son of Philip II? Well, Alexander's older brother is named Philip III. But Philip III did not become king. Instead, Alexander did. Well, why didn't he? Well, even Philip II, the father, understood that Philip III had mental issues. He was possibly born with some sort of autism, or at the very least some sort of other mental disability. It is unclear. It is very unclear because of, 2,000 years ago. They, of course, couldn't have diagnosed what it was exactly. They just described him as slow and of not full mind, and other kind of euphemisms and things along those lines. That even his father and Alexander, they both understood that he would never be able to rule as the king of Macedon. It could not happen. That unfortunately a person like that would not be able to do so. And Alexander was very fond of his older brother, his older half-brother. And he was worried that if he left him in Macedon, possibly enemies of Alexander would try to manipulate Philip into using him as a pawn to take over Macedon. And also maybe even just kill him, or using him as a bargaining chip to make Alexander come back and surrender. And so Alexander felt that the best way to protect Philip and also protect, any action against Alexander, was to bring Philip with him. And so that's what he did. Alexander, of course, starts marching down the coast of Asia Minor. This is Turkey, okay, Asia Minor, as we see right here, and he immediately goes to the site of Troy, which Troy had been a city, and at this time it was a small town during this period in the 330s. BCE. Of course, it was definitely not the city that was said to have been in the Homer's Iliad, but that didn't matter. Eventually, Alexander found something which seemed to be this sacred shield, which he said was the shield of Troy, and was Achilles' grave, and was from Achilles' grave. That it was possibly Achilles' own shield, or possibly Hector, the defender of Troy, as opposed to the attacker, which was Achilles. But he found this shield at Troy, and he gave it to one of his favorite bodyguards, one of his companions, and he said that you will basically be within 2 or 3 feet of me with that shield at all times, to protect me, and that it's kind of a good luck charm. And immediately after that, Alexander starts going from Troy towards his first battle site right here. And so let's get started with that battle site right here, which is the Battle of Granicus River. It is the first major battle against the Persian army that Alexander fights. He will fight 3 major battles during his life against the Persians, okay, and many other major battles afterwards. In May of 334 BC is when this takes place. The Persian army of about 30,000 men against Alexander's 40,000 men. So he does outnumber the Persians. It is led by the Persian king's son-in-law, a man named Mithridates. Okay, Mithridates. The Persians have also, in addition to their 30,000 soldiers, or included in it, rather, a large portion of Greek mercenaries, actual soldiers. Like, remember Xenophon's 10,000, how they were mercenaries? Well, this is exactly the same thing, that the Persians are still using Greek troops, as well as their own. And so these are probably from the coast of Ionia, which is up and down here. Remember Miletus from the Ionian Revolt was there. So they're probably soldiers from along this area, these Greek mercenaries. Alexander kind of decides that he is going to take his cavalry and charge across the river, where it is probably a little bit too deep for the Persians to think that the cavalry would just run across it, that they would take their time kind of going across, and it would slow them down. But Alexander decides that he is going to find the shallowest part of the river that is closest to the enemy camp and charge right across. And he completely surprises the Persians by doing this. Alexander the Great, of course, is shown here in this, artistic rendition years later. This is a modern painting. But he's got his weird, strange helmet with his, basically, feathers on the side, which signifies him as the leader so that his soldiers know where he is. And during this fight, he gets knocked off of his horse, Bucephalus, and he is actually struck in the head by a sword. And it's a horrible head injury. And right as that same Persian soldier after hitting him in the head, basically is now aiming his sword down to come down and kill Alexander the Great right then and there, on his first major battle, and Cletus the Black rides on in and chops off the arm of the Persian soldier and saves him right there, and saves Alexander. And so the Persian soldier is, of course, unable to kill Alexander, and Cletus is basically the hero of this battle for saving Alexander when he is in mortal peril. The Persians afterwards soon start losing very quickly, and the Persians lose about 4,000 men, and the Macedonians lose only about 300 to 400 men because of this surprise attack. It was a very quick battle. And so Alexander's feeling kind of at top of the game, and so he moves on from Granicus, and he starts moving down the coast here, and starts taking over city after city, but most of them, it's not really a fight. His plan is to stick close to the coast, attacking the cities and cutting off the Persian navy with his own navy from Greece, along the Ionian coast, or the coast of Asia Minor. And he plans on kind of taking city by city, but many of the cities, when he gets to them, welcome Alexander. The governors and city leaders say, no, we're not going to fight you. there's no point. We kind of know where this will go. We'll probably lose because we don't have a very large army, and you've got a larger army, because he defeated the only army that was in the area. Most of them ran for the hills afterwards. And the satrap, the governors, are kind of coming up with something to do later on elsewhere. But the Persian leaders that end up swearing loyalty to Alexander on the spot when he gets to the cities and towns are allowed by Alexander to keep their jobs. He says, no, there's no need to change it and leave one of my Greek soldiers behind to run things if they plan on being loyal. As long as they show loyalty and say they're going to be loyal and keep that loyalty to me, there's no point changing things. And some places, however, do resist, such as the city of Halicarnassus, which is right there on the coast. It resists, and he ends up attacking the city for about a month or so, at least, and he kills and enslaves every single last person in the city and burns the city completely down. Very similar to Thebes, where if you attack him or resist him, he will destroy everything. But if you surrender, he rewards loyalty and rewards your surrender. And so it is very interesting kind of at that time. Again, he's only 21 years old. At a place called Gordium, okay, which is right up here in Asia Minor, in the middle of Asia Minor, he goes to this temple. And he has heard of the legend of the Gordian knot. It is this famous legend at the time in Asia Minor, and it is said that this giant knot that looks like this, which has no strings letting out. There is no end of this rope. It is all tied up all inside of itself, excuse me. And it's on top of an ox cart, okay? An ox cart, this giant cart normally pulled by oxen. Okay, and it's big. This ball of rope is very, very thick. Each of these knots of rope is like the thickness of a person's arm. And the prophecy goes along with this knot is whoever can untie it will rule all of Asia. Okay, will rule all of Asia. Alexander looks at it for hours, trying to figure it out. And then he gets impatient, and he takes out his sword, and he cuts a piece of the rope and then pulls it loose, unraveling the whole thing. And so that's Alexander's solution, is he can't figure it out via the regular way of untying it. He figures it out with his own out-of-the-box solution. Kind of cheating, right? But he still says that he solved the puzzle, and that he will rule all of Asia by this prophecy. He then, soon after, jumps into a pool of water a few weeks later, going swimming one day, and he actually gets sick from probably a bug bite or swallowing some of the water. He ends up getting malaria and almost dies. So he's now had two very close calls to death. One with the hit at Granicus that he took on his head, and then the other one now getting very sick. Moving on, he is going to go into the new Battle of Issus on November 5th, 333 BCE. And it is the second major battle against the Persians that he will fight. And King Darius, the king of Persia himself, King Darius II, leads the Persian army. He heavily outnumbers the Macedonians. His army is about 50,000 to 60,000, while the Macedonian army is only 40,000. Alexander is also kind of surrounded at one point by the Persian army. The Persian army is able to even get around behind Alexander's army and attack Alexander's Macedonian's camp, where wounded soldiers had been bringing with him from previous small battles. And actually, the Persians cut off the hands of every single soldier at the Macedonian camp, all the wounded soldiers and sick soldiers, and sends them in boxes, in giant crates, on the back of carts, to Alexander, basically as a threat, saying, this happens to you if you don't back down next. Well, Alexander will not bow down to this threat, and decides that he is going to fight back. And so he readies his army for the fight the next day, on November 5th, as the Persian army readies itself. That night, the night of November 4th into 5th, of several elephants, several dozen war elephants, arrive. Now, an elephant, you've seen an elephant probably in the zoo, or at least in videos if you've not been to a zoo, and they're giant, right? Well, imagine an elephant coming at you with not just the elephant, but this large box on the back of it where riders are there with bows and arrows and spears, as well as possible armor on the elephant. And so these elephants are for war. They're basically the equivalent of having a tank in battle in the ancient world, and are extremely scary. The Greeks have never seen an elephant before, but luckily for them, the elephants had been marching all night long to keep up with Darius's army that had been trying to attack Macedon's camp, the Macedonian camp, and so the elephants don't actually participate in the battle. And Alexander ends up charging headfirst into the battle, and we have this artistic mosaic of the period, and I've got a better view of it in a bit, but we've got Alexander fighting and throwing a spear at Darius, who is on the back of a chariot. Darius is narrowly missed by the spear, and Darius orders his army to retreat, or his bodyguard to retreat. At that same time, Alexander wants to pursue, but he finds out the rest of his army is kind of losing at that point in the battle, and so he and his companion cavalry are required elsewhere, as opposed to chasing off after Darius to defeat and kill Darius personally. He is forced to go and help the rest of his army. Because he helps the rest of his army, the Persians lose 20,000 men, and the Macedonians only 7,000 men. And after the battle, the Macedonians end up capturing even Darius's own camp, where the Persians were staying, because Darius and most of his army left in a hurry right after being attacked personally by Alexander. And the Macedonians capture the queen, Darius's wife, and the majority, Statira is his wife's name, and the majority of the Persian family, royal family. Alexander actually doesn't treat them like prisoners. He actually treats them like royalty. He asks his troops to make sure that they always treat them well, and he makes sure that they have the best food. He even meets a woman named Barsine, one of the Persian members of the royal court, kind of like the handmaiden to, or the personal servant of the queen, okay? And he falls in love with her, and actually he and she end up having an affair, Barsine and her, and Alexander, sorry. And this is a painting, actually, the same mosaic, larger right here. You can see Alexander the Great right here, and there's Darius on his chariot, and the spear kind of, and this picture is about to be thrown at him. It actually hits one of the riders on the chariot with Darius, the person that drives it, and so Darius was had to force to run away himself on the chariot. And here's a picture of Alexander with kind of brownish hair as opposed to blonde, okay? And here's his spear, and that's Bucephalus right there. Well, soon after attacking at the Battle of Issus, we end up having Alexander move on to the city of Tyre, along the coast of Asia and the coast of the Middle East down here. So he starts fighting at Issus, and now he is moving southwards this way, and he reaches the city of Tyre. And we have talked about Tyre before. Who conquered it last time? And if your answer is Nebuchadnezzar, you are right. Nebuchadnezzar is the only person that conquered the city of Tyre. Well, this is the city of Tyre. This is what it would look like. Ignore this. But at the time, it had very big walls, and the city was basically protected by the walls all the way up to the edge of the island. It's a half-mile out to sea. Okay, the island is a half-mile out to sea and has these areas where the ships can dock, which also still have big not gates, but big wall areas where the ships would be protected, and big towers on the side. Now, Alexander goes to Tyre. He rides a ship up to the side of Tyre and kind of starts asking them, can I make a pilgrimage to the temple in the city? And the temple he wants to go to is to the person, or the heroic person, Melkart. Okay? Melkart is basically the equivalent of Hercules to the Greeks. okay, but the Tyrian version, the Phoenician version of Hercules, where he's half man, half god. One of Alexander's possible half-brothers, right, if we counted him as actually a son of Zeus, but he's not. He was mortal. And so Hercules was said to have been one of the sons of Zeus. And so Alexander wants to go and go into this temple. And so he sends his ship over there and he asks them, and they say yes. And then when he sends envoys to go and arrange, like, when he can go in the temple, the envoys are brought up to the edge of the city wall, had their throats slit, and dumped over the edge of the wall. And Alexander sees this, and he takes this as a huge insult. He's like, okay, so that would have been me if I'd have gone in. And so at that point, in the year 332 BCE, he orders the attack on the city. And it takes 7 months to attack this city. Nebuchadnezzar took it in 13 years. Alexander does it in 7 months. And the reason why he does it is while he is attacking it with his navy, he has, from the coast to the wall of the city, this giant causeway made of ships just dumping dirt and making as much wood as possible and making this giant bridge from the coast to the island, a half-mile long bridge. And he eventually reaches the other side, and he's using siege towers and catapults from all of his ships to protect the siege, to make the workers protected, and firing stones from the catapults at them, and these giant siege towers, and basically moving walls along the bridge to protect the soldiers making the bridge. And when he finally gets the wall himself, Alexander is the person that is one of the first soldiers onto the wall. Again, he loves to be jumping in at the thick of things himself. Alexander is actually wounded in this fight, and when he finishes the battle and is saved by his soldiers, as well as the city is taken, he again basically ends up ordering the city to be enslaved, the people of the city of Tyre to be enslaved. But it's an accomplishment because he ended up taking the city in, again, 7 months. Nebuchadnezzar took 13 years, and until then, and since Nebuchadnezzar, the city had never fallen to anybody. So, kind of a bit of an accomplishment there. We'll move on to his next phase of the campaign against the Persians, where he moves down towards Egypt. Now that he's taken Tyre, he's going to move into Egypt, and we'll start that in the next video.